assembling the clutch is really quite easily. First of all, let's make our loops for our D-rings so as we can hang these off the top of the clutch and make it into a sort of pseudo little shoulder clutch bag. So I've just folded to the centre like we normally do when we make loops, and then edge stitch either side. These loops don't have to be very big. 1/2 inch D-rings. And we're just going to stitch those into position. So those lengths of those loop lengths are about 2 inches, 5 centimeters. Fold it in half, put the D-ring on, and then with the foot as close to the D-ring as possible, let's just machine baste those together. Let's separate them, take off any little hairs, and then trim back to about 3/8 or 1 centimeter. There we have a pair of D-rings ready to go. First of all, we want to join our 2 inside pockets. So we have our upper and our lower. So it gives us 20 card pockets, 2 zip pockets, and a phone pocket. So seam on seam, corner on corner, and stitching just inside the perimeter stitching line. Depending on how fat your foot is, you might have to look at where your zip puller is. It might not be in the right place. So there we go. Very, very fine strip. So we need to open that seam up. Let that pocket sit flat on that opening seam. Don't try and fold that pocket up without opening that seam. Just let it sit flat. Okay, so there we go. That's our inside of our clutch. Now let's look at our flap. Now our lining for our flap with our little PVC pocket on it is slightly bigger. So what I want us to do is centralize our lining. So you want your outside seams, perimeter seam lines sitting inside the perimeter seam lines of your lining. Stitch from the outside, then we were going to stitch just on the inside edge stitching or perimeter stitching of the flap. We're stitching just on the inside, so our needle is grazing along those stitches. Smaller stitch, loosen your foot pressure if you wish to go around curves. Make sure you get nice sharp corners. Make sure they are on the corner. Right, so you can see that I've got those. So we want to trim that seam allowance back to what I call a shy 1/4 inch. So the lining side for this flap is bigger than the actual flap itself, so as that you don't have to worry about seams being missed when you're stitching. Clip into those corners and then clip around your curve. Don't take dovetails out, just snip to the stitching or just away from the stitching. If you take little wedge dovetails in there, you'll see that they'll show on the edge of your work when you turn it through. And there we have that. Our pocket's ready. That's nicely pressed. You can edge stitch that if you wish. I haven't. Now we want to actually measure up. I think it's about 1 inch from that bottom curve. Find the center. And then use the washer die from your magnetic closure to mark where we're going to make some little cuts. Push the prongs through, put the washer on the back, open out the teeth. So there is one side of our magnetic closure. Follow the instructions from your manufacturer. And with the second side, trying to find an area where we're not going to be cutting any stitching. So that's safe. Really don't want to be going and cutting stitching to add this in, so you might want to start with this side first if you weren't sure and get that closure in, but don't want to cut the stitching. We can possibly help it because there's nothing we can do to save it if it goes raggy. Right, so what happens here is that when that's closed, your flap is sitting a whole seam allowance further up than on your front, so it's a 1/2 inch difference, and that will give you enough for closure. That's the minimum, so it's 1/2 inch difference is the minimum. Sew that bottom seam, or the base seam, as we did with the inside pockets. Just inside the perimeter stitching line. Corner on corner. We need to see if we can keep those border squares so as they are running in lines, so they don't look silly if they're slightly off. We have an extra piece of stabilizer there because we decided to, once the block was out of the hoop, we decided to re-stitch the insides of some flowers with a stronger colour, which you can only notice from the inside because we've got an extra layer of stabilizer. Press that seam open. Now we place our loops just inside our seam allowance, and they go in quarter to 3/8 of an inch away from the perimeter stitching line. Wherever they go, they need to be even on either side. Then we're going to actually just sew our flap on. Again, that's centralised. We've got to try and keep those border stitches as even as possible. And turn our flap in once we're happy with the positioning of our hardware. That's looking good. Just put our pockets inside, turn our flap down, and sandwich our right sides together, and then let's pin or clip around the edge. That top edge is going to have the hole to pull through. Let's match our centre seams at our base seam. So it's seam on top of seam. Corner on corner. So we're going to be where our flappers, we're going to be making a mark about 3 centimetres in from the perimeter stitching line, or 1 1/4 inches. Just so as it just passes, the loops. So it just passes those loops, so it's quite secure on the top there. We're looking around about 5 inches. It's going to be a bear to turn through because it's quite firm there, but not impossible. I try and match my base seams first. I just actually run over those in the seam allowance. And I've changed my foot to being a zip foot. I've got an adjustable zip foot. This one's from a very, very old Elna. It's one of my favourite square zip feet for doing bags. It's very flat. Won't fit on all machines, but it fits on this one. I suppose it's because the toe is slightly lifted in the front, doesn't catch on things. And I'm just stitching around inside the perimeter stitching line, just making sure my line's sitting on top of each other. You can go around the perimeter a couple of times if you want to make it more secure. Coming up to our corner, just make sure those seams are sitting on top of each other okay. I just unpicked that seam because it wasn't sitting quite correctly. Come up to our corner and pivot. We're running onto a bit of bulk here, so there may be some hesitation with the foot slightly. Reinforce this really quite securely, back and forth a few times, just to keep it nice and secure, because there's going to be a lot of pressure on those stitches when we're turning the work through. Okay, so there we have it there. Trim off our corners, trim out any extra bulk or stabilizer from our seams. Don't trim the seams back. I don't think that's really necessary, unless you're using PU or something thicker. Maybe if you're using denim or something like that. Be careful how far you go to the corners. Remember that the rule is the length of the stitch is the maximum distance to the stitch corner. So the length of the stitch is the maximum distance that you actually clip to the stitch corner. Now, pull the flap out first. Just be aware that you do have plastic on that, so just be aware what you're pulling. Then I put my hand in here, and I couldn't go. I was putting my hand into the pocket, and it makes it look difficult, but it's because I hadn't realised that I was actually putting my hand into the actual inside phone pocket. I couldn't get to the bottom, but I can now. So push those bottom corners out through the hole first and gently wangle them out. Just stop for a quick photo for our notes. Don't be in a hurry. So we'll just push those corners out. And give it a nice firm press. Tuck that under. We can either hand stitch that opening closed, or we can machine stitch it closed. Very cute with time. So I'm actually machine stitching in the ditch along that top seam to close that opening that we pulled our work through. And there we have it. If you used tear away, now you'll be tearing that away to get our zip pockets open. That will be it now that you'll be doing that. So I can put a phone in there, do that up. Hope you enjoy making this little Katie clutch wallet.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Martyn's tutorial on the Katie clutch wallet. You can shop this beautiful clutch wallet at swpea.com. See you next time.